happy to hear that theme again? I am. I co-wrote it with Lawrence, and we recorded it a couple of years ago. One of the most fulfilling artistic experiences of my life, coming up with that theme, because I'm not a musical person. I'm pretty artistic. I can draw, I can paint, I can write, I can do lots of other things, but music has been the area that has usually escaped me, except sometimes in dreams I come up with some stuff. But that is something that I was able to accomplish, and he helped facilitate it, perform it, and I like to think that it's something pretty cool that we came up with. I was happy with it. Some people like it. Some people don't. I don't give a shit. I'm happy with it, and I'm happy you're here with us at Wrestling Roundtable Radio. Back here on Blog Talk Radio, Go Fight Live, WrestlingRoundtable.com. And if you're not listening live, it's on YouTube after the fact. But you should get with the program and listen live Tuesdays. You can also get the embedding code for this player, the Roundtable Radio player, at our blogtalkradio.com/WrestlingRoundtable account. You can put it on your blog or your website or wherever. Spread the word and get your friends involved in the community. Wherever you're listening or watching, share, rate, comment, and subscribe, please. And we also want to remind you to go to our main hub of WrestlingRoundtable.com. Everything is there for you. Bios, columns, recaps. We've had a lot of viewer-submitted recaps lately, a lot of old ECW pay-per-views reviewed. Unforgiven 2006 by Joe Schubert in Las Vegas. WrestleMania this past April. Actually, that was just this month. At the beginning of the month. By Bill Treadway, who also did the Lockdown recap. But I did want to point out a couple guest columns that are up there right now because I think they're particularly interesting for you to check out. One of our guest columns is from James Ashton in Britain. He did a history of British wrestling, and it's very interesting to read. If you're a wrestling historian, it's kind of like how you may read about American wrestling growing up from the carnivals and the carny days around the turn of the century with guys like Farmer Burns and George Hackenschmidt. Well, this is the British equivalent of that, and it pretty much goes up to the modern day. It doesn't really go into detail about modern indies like FWA or 1PW or whatever it might be, but it's rather thorough aside from that, so give that a read. Also, Deron Browning has written a column for us and has several more waiting in the queue, so they will be coming up. Also, a new news format, new way to read the news over at WrestlingRoundtable.com. I think it's a lot more easier to get the news this time, and I think you should check it out because how many times, and I'm talking to you, Mr. LeConte, joining us, Rodney, how many times have I said, if you read the news at WrestlingRoundtable.com, you would know.
You do remind me of that, Erich. Everybody get on that because I sometimes forget to do it.
Well, you're not the only one, and I just wanted to mention that because I do a lot of thorough research for this. First of all, there is no real standard for wrestling journalism anyway. Everyone always gets Dave Meltzer to do the talking head segments on TV, but if you've ever read a newsletter, I don't see how that really passes for journalism. It's really funny. I don't know if you ever read his stuff on Yahoo.com, Rodney for MMA, how much he actually proofreads and classes it up, let's say, for Yahoo, because it's an actual gig, as opposed to the stapled, unproofread, run-on-sentence crap that he prints. But you see wrestling news sites, it's just the same garbage, copied and pasted from... You see, if you do a Google search and go to different sites, it's the same news story with the exact same wording because everyone just copies it from one or two other places. No one tries for, the basics that you fucking learn in school, like who, what, when, where, why, and how. Well, I try and do that for you. I try to give you the facts, not so much the rumors and the bullshit, but actual results, deaths, shakeups, lots of other things in the world of mixed martial arts and pro wrestling, but everything you need to know at the news on WrestlingRoundtable.com. But while you're there, please support the show by going to our store, getting the Wrestling Roundtable t-shirt, showing it around at wrestling or MMA shows. Hey, what's that? Hey, it's this cool show. You should check it out. Call in. Sign up for the newsletter, where there's an exclusive piece of content in there where I'm going through my top 10 favorite matches of all time. In no particular order, really, but they're just my favorite matches. People always want to know. Well, if you sign up for the newsletter, you can find out, along with other exclusive content, like this past issue about Jay Lethal's firing in TNA, something you're not going to read elsewhere. What is that? Sign up and find out. You can also interact with other fans over at the message board. And, like I mentioned, the store, also, we have an Amazon store. If you need to get anything on Amazon.com, please do it through our Amazon store. It doesn't have to be wrestling or MMA. It can be a dishwasher or a T-shirt, whatever it might be. Just get it through our Amazon store. Now, introducing the panel for the night. More to come later on, but who is on the air now? It's Coriander Ake in Chicago, our indie expert, and posts on the message board all the time. Fan joins the panel. That's what this is all about. Hello, Corey.
Hello, Erich. Hello, everyone.
Feeling better? I heard you were sick since Easter.
I'm actually doing the show with a fever.
You Indians and your weak immune systems.
Hey, now that just shows how dedicated I am to this program. I'm sick as a dog. I only recently stopped barfing, yet I'm still doing the show.
Well, hopefully we don't make people barf some more. Will Brooks. Hello, Will.
Hey, everybody. I just want to give a shout-out to all my fellow Philadelphia sports fans. The Flyers advanced to the second round of NHL playoffs tonight. Really a great 7-game series against the Buffalo Millers. Good job.
Will Brooks is in our chat room every Monday night during Raw on WrestlingRoundtable.com, and someone who's been absent from Wrestling Roundtable Radio far too long is back on the air. Rodney LeConte, hey yo.
Hey yo, and on the Will Brooks note, I want to say big thank you to Chicago Bulls for advancing to the semifinals. First time since the early 90s that they should advance in the playoffs, so big ups to all my Chi-Town fans out there.
Well, Rodney, I want to know what you've been up to. First of all, you just attended the Tribeca Film Festival in New York. I'm jealous because I had read about this and had intended to see if I could make it out, but obviously I didn't make it. You got to see the Anderson Silva documentary, so how was that?
It was a good work. We definitely had to stand in line because all my tickets were sold out the week before, which makes no sense because they had a separate line for rush tickets. Anyway, we ended up basically getting the last 2 tickets of the show. It was pretty good. It was funny in a way. It definitely showed a little more in-depth of Anderson Silva. I think it was pretty well shot. It was basically building up to that Chael Sonnen fight. So it started out in UFC 112 at Abu Dhabi, and then went all the way to one.
That's not the greatest starting point, is it?
Exactly. So it showed Anderson Silva, and the manager was in it. Like Chael Sonnen was basically meant to be the heel of the movie. But all in all, it was a great work. What surprised me was that Anderson Silva was actually there in attendance when I was there.
Woo!
And so was the director and so was his manager. And Silva was just crowded, so I couldn't get to him. And he left right away. But I did get to speak with the director and have a good talk with him. All in all, I would recommend it.
Does he speak English a lot in this movie?
No.
Really? Because I just watched a clip of him kicking Jim Norton on Opie and Anthony's show this morning, and he seems to speak English perfectly fine. I know I'm not the only one. You want to, like you're saying, it was a great work. I think him not speaking English is a great work.
A friend of mine said that it basically felt like a primetime show or a countdown show. It didn't have any narration. It felt a lot more depth than that. It definitely had that authentic documentary feel to it.
Well, speaking of authentic, the genuine article is what I'm talking to because you just competed in Grappler's Quest, the Beast of the East tournament on Saturday, April 9th at the Convention Hall in Asbury Park. You placed second, silver medal, in men's no-gi beginner light heavyweight.
I did good, and I mean, considering that I was right about to leave when I competed, I think I did fairly well. I mean, I basically competed 4.5 hours past the scheduled time that I was supposed to compete. So you can imagine how I felt when they finally called my name.
You had to wake up?
No, I was awake, but you know what? It's a different mindset. You know, when you're about to compete, there's one point where I had a really good sweat going, and you just have to get yourself in a frame of mind where you're going to win, and you're basically competing against someone who's trained to compete against you. I won. I got to the finals, and I made a huge mistake. I looked at the kid, and I thought, how the hell did this kid make it to the finals? And I underestimated him. And for the first time, I got taken down in competition, trying to fight out submissions. I was basically in shock. At the end of the fight, I had advantage. By that point, you know, he was up in points, so I lost by points. But, oh well, it happened.
Hope you do a little better next time, and congratulations on placing second.
Thank you.
What we do on this show, as you know, Rodney, is talk about the latest goings-on in mixed martial arts and pro wrestling. Sometimes we look back, because we look at past, present, and future topics, but we're going to talk about some of the major MMA cards that have gone down lately, starting with Spike TV's Fight Night 24 for UFC from the Key Arena in Seattle. Chen Sung Young in the featherweight division, making his debut for UFC. Wow, what a finish over Leonard Garcia. Leonard Garcia is one of those guys that I always look forward to seeing fight because win, lose, or draw, he's always moving forward. Whether he's going to connect with those punches or not, he's always swinging. Constant movement on Leonard Garcia's part, constant energy, and he just keeps going and going. And unfortunately, it came down to the second round in this rematch. Wow, what a fucking finish. The first ever twister in UFC, and essentially, I thought he was going for a rear naked choke, but instead, twisting his body in half, almost looked like, I'm trying to put it in terms the wrestling fans would understand, it's almost like a shoot Regal stretch, without the STF portion, of course, but man, in the replays, you could really see what you couldn't see in the initial camera shot of how he was really, and this is why it's called the twister, how he was really twisting his spine around his body. Oh, it was just incredible. And a good debut, I think, for the Korean Zombie. So your thoughts on Chan Sung-jung?
It was a great debut from him. I think people were expecting another barroom slugfest like the first one, but this one he's a little bit more patient, a little bit more technical. I think both of them were, but they're still both pushing the pace. Chan Sung-jung, it's just amazing how big of a fan favorite he is. The crowd is going nuts. He showed a lot of his grappling. I guess he didn't really perform in the first fight. It didn't really look like he was doing much, but then after a while he started cranking it, and I could just imagine how much pain Leonard Garcia was. And at that point, he was just locked up and couldn't go anywhere. He had no other choice but to tap.
Moving on into the welterweight division, Anthony Rumble Johnson scoring a unanimous decision over Dan Hardy. Dan Hardy is someone I'm not a fan of, as you know, but unquestionable fighting spirit. We saw it last year at Prudential Center when he fought GSP, and GSP was doing his best, I think, to try and make him submit in the Kimura and the armbar, and it looked like he was going to snap his arm in half, and he wouldn't tap. Unfortunately, Dan Hardy didn't show enough to the judges in this, and he lost by decision. So your thoughts on Rumble Johnson defeating the Mohawk?
It just really shows that like these fighters overseas just really have to work on wrestling defense. I mean, that's the key, especially Dan Hardy when he's in such a wrestler-heavy division. The top three guys are really wrestler-heavy. So I really thought that, especially after the GSP fight, that would have been the number one thing that he would work on. And Anthony Rumble Johnson, it showed that he was working on it. His lack of wrestling was the reason why he lost the unanimous decision to Josh Koscheck. I don't know why people are booing Anthony Rumble Johnson. I mean, he showed a different side of his game. I mean, it is mixed martial art. I know people expect a stand-up war, but, you know, it's not like these guys are just standing around not doing anything. Dan Hardy should know enough by now, at this point in the game, that you have to train for every opponent, and you have to train for all aspects of the game.
In the main event, originally supposed to be Tito Ortiz, but he had to bow out. In the light heavyweight division, Lil Nog, Antonio Rogero Nogueira took on Phil Davis. Phil Davis has just got a freaky physique. He looks like some sort of Ray Harryhausen stop-motion caricature with his fucking lats and shit. I mean, he's just a mean-looking dude, let's say. He got the unanimous decision over Little Nog. Your thoughts on Phil Davis, who is someone we're going to be talking about a little later on in regards to John Jones. Phil Davis beating Little Nog.
Phil Davis, especially for the lack of time that he had to prepare for Little Nog, and since this is such a big step up in competition, you know, I'm just really impressed by this young guy. Little Nog, I said this after the Beta fight, he really has great wrestling defense, especially in the double leg. Phil Davis couldn't get not one double leg takedown on Little Nog in the first round, and once he found that the single leg was working, he really just went to that. He kept busy on the ground. He was young. He really grinded out his decision, and it's really going to be interesting to see what this young guy has in the future. You know, once he starts, I mean, and he's great at submissions too. Pretty sure he's only a blue belt or a white belt in jiu-jitsu. He's definitely a force to be reckoned with, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens when he goes against Sugar and Philly.
We'll talk about that in a little bit, but I want to talk about the Ultimate Fighter. The heavyweights, Brock Lesnar and Junior Dos Santos, who will fight in a few months, coaching the welterweights this season.
I liked what I saw. I mean, I think the fighters are pretty decent so far. There's not as much smack talk by Brock as much as I would like. You know, I kind of would have wished he would do a little bit more. Cut a little promo on Dos Santos would be kind of cool. But Nothing yet.
He's sure sticking with that turning chicken shit into chicken salad line. Rodney LeConte, your thoughts on the Ultimate Fighter so far? We're about 4 weeks in, and I don't know about you, but I can't get over that scar that Cain Velasquez left on Brock Lesnar's left cheek. Every time I look at his face, I think of Cain Velasquez.
Oh, man, and I'm sure he thinks of Cain Velasquez, too. He wants in it bad. I'm impressed that Junior Santos knows so much English, so I'm impressed with that. So it's a little more humble Brock than I think people are expecting. I don't know if they're expecting the UFC 100 Brock. I mean, if they really wanted that, they should have made him opposite Couture Fight Mir. What are you going to do against, Junior Santos? This shows to be like, a real nice, genuine guy, even though he's a beast inside the cage. We have some pretty good competitors in there. There have been some good fights. Last week was pretty good. The week before was back and forth with Brock's number one guy goes down. And it's going to be interesting to see how this season plays out. I hope that it really does justice to the fact that it really builds a new star, because we haven't had a Ultimate Fighter star in a while.
Right.
As far as building up the Lesnar Dos Santos fight, I think it'll just make more people intrigued. I mean, it's an intriguing fight in general. I don't think they needed the Ultimate Fighter to build up this fight. But I think it'll, do what they intended to get, just a few more viewers, a few more casual viewers to turn in and buy the pay-per-view.
Well, I'll tell you what, the fight that happened a couple weeks ago, which was between Ryan McGillivray on Dos Santos' team against Len Bentley for Brock Lesnar's team, man, that was such a good fight.
That was.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that it didn't go to a third round like on a normal card, because, man, if any fight was calling for a third round, it was that. Holy shit, it was tough to score, and both guys were fighting their heart out. I love Len Bentley. He looks kind of like Petey Williams or Tim Roth's MMA equivalent, and of course he's upset that he lost by decision, even if by a hair, because a loss is a loss. And it did suck that Brock didn't get the context of it, because he went off to take care of family business or whatever, so all he knew was he lost. If he had seen the fight, I think he wouldn't have had such a reaction like he did. You guys were lollygagging. But something else that Ultimate Fighters taught me is I wish Junior Dos Santos would do commentary, because I think it would probably sound something like, nice, yes, nice, good, yes, nice. That fight from this past week, though, the Ramsey Najim, which is one of the coolest names I've ever heard, I think, defeating Charlie Rader. Oh, man. It was like the complete opposite of the Bentley McGillivray fight, because that was the rear naked choke on for half a second? Not even. I think Rader was tapping before it was even in. It was just really accentuating what they're going for with this season, I suppose, is that Lesnar's team is creating this impression on Lesnar that these guys don't want to be here and they don't want it and blah, blah, blah. And that seems to be the drama for this season. So any thoughts further on those fights, Rodney?
Yeah, I think the last one, he really tapped out. As soon as Form was up against his throat, he started tapping and
it was pathetic. I'm not a fighter, but I've been choked out before, and I lasted longer than that.
Yeah, seriously. People just really need to understand that the type of exposure that they're getting and opportunity that they're getting from this. I mean, even if they try their hearts out, make an impression on the show, even if they don't get a UFC contract, they could still be a name on the smallest circuits and make their way back up to the UFC. I mean,
exactly. Not to cut you off, but Matrix Fights just happened on Friday in Philadelphia, and you know what? If Len Bentley happened to be fighting on that card, I would have fucking gone, because the guy obviously showed a lot. Dana White came in after the fight and said, hey, even though you lost, that's how you fight.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look how many stars came out of people who didn't win the Ultimate Fighter, like Josh Koscheck and Kenny Florian and Keith Jardine and Stephan Bonner. You could still make a name yourself despite from being on the show.
Talking about Matrix on Friday, my friend Breland Von Arstendalen actually won a fight at that showcase. First round, rear naked choke. Hopefully he gets on next season.
Well, it wasn't the first Strikeforce show under the Zuffa banner. That was actually the Challengers 15 show, but the first major Strikeforce show on Showtime since Zuffa bought it happened recently from the Valley View Casino Center in San Diego, Diaz versus Daley, when Dana White said business as usual, he wasn't kidding. It was typical Strikeforce, good and bad, and everything seemed normal. So I guess while that lasts, in these couple of years we have left till the Showtime contract runs out or whatever it is, good, because Strikeforce, as many goofy business decisions as they make, booking decisions, let's say, at least the fighters are pretty good, especially in the heavyweight division. I think right now that they've got the lead over UFC. UFC's heavyweight division has pretty much fallen off or fallen apart the past couple of years, and there's still some good guys in there, but especially seeing the heavyweight tournament live, that really showed you that Strikeforce has a stacked lineup there. But that's not all. They've got other great fighters in other divisions, and I'll tell you what, the thing I took away from the Diaz versus Daley show the most is they really need to do unification fights. I don't know what you think, Rod, but looking at the champions that they had, especially in the last couple fights, Gilbert Melendez and Nick Diaz look so strong that it's just like, come on, they really need to drop the bullshit and do some of these dream fights. But before we get to those, wanted to talk about, speaking of dream fights, two of the dream fighters, dream champions, lightweight champion Shinya Aoki and light heavyweight champion Gegard Mousasi. Their titles were not on the line, but they returned to Strikeforce, both on the same card yet again. This time, Shinya Aoki made a much better impression than he did the last time, and even the last time he fought, that I remember, the Dynamite New Year's Eve show, which was just fucking pathetic in this mixed rules fight. It was just horrible. Shinya Aoki came in, along with Mousasi, with a lot of this hype. They're these big dream champions and blah, 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 and neither one of them really delivered the first time out. This, I think, is the time that they made up for it. Shinya Aoki getting the first-round submission with a neck crank over Lyle Beerbaum. So what'd you think of Aoki's comeback to Strikeforce, Rodney?
I thought it was a very successful one, especially with everything that happened in Japan. I think it was a great uplift for Shinya. He looked really well. I mean, that neck crank was just devastating. Facing a real tough guy in Lyle Beerbaum. I think he had maybe one loss coming into this fight, and Aoki just really put his game plan together. Just really looked like the Aoki of old, not the Aoki that got shut down by Gilbert Melendez.
Right.
This guy really got to work his game, really took him to the ground. And once he's on the ground, he showed that he's a wizard. Yeah, Aoki's back in the WCOM. In
the light heavyweight division, Gegard Mousasi fought Keith Jardine. Jardine making his Strikeforce debut, back under Zuffa contract. It went to a majority draw, and once again, Rodney, I'm saying I should be an MMA judge because, unfortunately, my score ended up being that way too, 29-29, because of the point taken away in the first round from the illegal upkick. If that point hadn't been taken away, Mousasi definitely would have won. I gave him the last two rounds, Jardine the first, but that's the way it goes, unfortunately, and until we change around the scoring system and judging in MMA, that's going to keep happening. But like I said, that's how my score ended up because of the point taken away. So your thoughts on Mousasi's almost victory in this majority draw with Jardine, the goatee?
I really don't know. I really think it should have been Mousasi. I mean, maybe I'm not taking into consideration the point deduction, but I think Mousasi just really damaged Keith Jardine. Almost in every round, I would say, yes, Jardine did look better.
You don't think Jardine owned the first round?
I don't think so.
Really?
He took him down, but he didn't do anything from there. He took him down, and Mousasi was up right after that. And even
I don't think Mousasi did enough to win the points in that one either. So it's just, in terms of pure activity, I give it to Jardine.
I don't know. I think you can look at Jardine's face, and I couldn't call him a winner. Mousasi, the only blood on him was Jardine's blood. I mean, yes, he got taken down, but nothing happened. No punches, no ground and pound from Jardine. I mean, Mousasi, especially from his last fight, his loss to King Mo, should have been more aware of his takedowns. And to Mousasi, I mean, if I was Mousasi, I would consider this a loss. Jardine steps in last minute, like 9 days in advance or something like that, sitting on the couch one day, the next day he gets a call and he's training for a fight with potential championship contention. If I was Mousasi, I'd really go back in the drawing board and just really work, because I think he really had the ability but never really pulled the trigger on finishing Jardine.
It was a draw only because Masasi lost a point. Take away that, he won the fight.
Correct.
So it kind of sucks for him, but yeah, he should have upkicked.
Mm-hmm. Well, we get to the two title fights. Lightweight champion Gilbert Melendez in yet another rematch. This time it was Tetsuya Kawajiri, and the elbows made the difference. That's one of the differences in Strikeforce now. His elbows are on the ground, and I'm happy they are, because it was quite a finish. First round TKO. Man, those are some vicious elbows. Melendez looked like a beast. Thoughts on Melendez once again defending the title, Will Brooks?
His boxing so crisp against this guy. You know, it was amazing how he was just able to land shots galore and not even get tested. And yeah, you're right. His final elbows were devastating. I felt bad for the other guy. He looked outmatched and outclassed the whole time.
Melendez, man, he really showed that he's up there in the upper echelon of lightweights in the world. The thing I like about him is he's always looking for new challenges. He's always up for whatever challenge is in front of him, and he just really wants to prove the best. And I really can't wait to see what happens when he starts facing number 1, 2, 3 lightweights in the world.
But what about what I was saying about unifying these titles? I mean, we still even have to have Clay Guida and Anthony Pettis settle it to face the winner of Edgar and Maynard's rematch coming up soon. Is it too much to ask to throw Melendez into the mix? Should they just have one set of champions? What do you think, Will Brooks?
Oh, down the road, but not yet. You know, wait until the TV deals are done and then do it. Clash of Champions kind of thing. Not yet, though. Let these guys fight it out. They deserve it.
I don't know. As soon as I see how good these champions looked on the Strikeforce card, I'm starting to salivate for unification fights. Rodney, what's your thought?
Any fan would, salivate, but at the same time, it's good to see, Strikeforce champions do their thing and build themselves up, especially now with the Zuffa marketing machine behind them. Right now, I would say keep them separate just because of the UFC lightweight title. There's so many contenders. A good chance to, I guess, help the Strikeforce brand a little bit. I mean, they have their Showtime contract. Who knows what other, contracts they have. But I think eventually down the line, within the next 2 or 3 years, we'll see that merger, how WC merged into the UFC. So right now, I think they're really just, before they rush into this, they're still trying to merge WC with UFC. I mean, people still really don't know, all the champions. They don't know a lot about Dominic Cruz. They, talk about building a 125 division. So I wouldn't rush anything right now. Just keep the champions as they are.
Well, maybe not the lightweight division, but I think the welterweight and heavyweight divisions could use it. But let's move on to the welterweight division, because in this main event, the champion in Strikeforce welterweight, Nick Diaz, was facing Paul Daley. I can't think of a main event fight between two characters that I like less. I'm not a fan of either one's attitude. That's not taking anything away from their skill. They've both got plenty, but just not very savory characters. That being said, it ended up being what I think so far has been the fight of the year. It barely got to the end of the first round. 4 minutes, 57 seconds in, they ended it with a TKO victory for Nick Diaz. Daley was out. But up until then, wow, what back and forth between these two. It was incredible. I'll let you talk about it, Will Brooks.
Just like Melendez, I thought Diaz's boxing was so crisp, on point. He looked great. He has huge balls for going right up at Daley and sticking with him on the feet. Anybody in the mother would have thought, he's going to take him down. He's a great wrestler. Nope. He kept it standing and beat Daley in his own game. Even though Daley landed his patented left hook and dropped him twice with it. Wasn't enough. Go Nick Diaz. And you may not like him, but I love Nick Diaz. I'm a big fan of his, and I can't wait to see him finally get in the UFC and fight some great middleweights. Love to see that.
Well, Nick Diaz has said that he's considering doing boxing later in the year. And if Strikeforce is business as usual, as they said, they probably would let him. I mean, they're still going through with M1 negotiations with Fedor's next fight. Obviously, Dream Fighters were on this card, so that wouldn't happen in UFC, like Anderson Silva wants to fight Roy Jones Jr. in a boxing match, but maybe Nick Diaz will be doing boxing later in the year, if it's business as usual. But back to the Paul Daley fight. Rodney, your thoughts on what I said so far has been fight of the year?
Well, round of the year, yes. Fight of the year, we'll have to give it to Frank Yeager and Gray Maynard. I think this was a very, very exciting round. I mean, the way it finished is complete opposite, I thought. I thought it could have gone either way, but I thought it was either Daley was going to finish him with a TKO or Nick Diaz was going to submit him. I didn't think Diaz was going to get the TKO. And, wow, I mean, I think I just really underestimate Nick Diaz's stand-up because I guess from the outside they don't look to be that powerful, but Paul Daley will be able to tell me different. He goes really back and forth. I mean, I at one point I thought it was done. I thought Paul Daley did it when Diaz got on the ground, but Diaz did a good job of bobbing and weaving on the ground. It was really an exciting fight. A great cap to another great night, and this is probably the fourth or fifth consistent great card that Strikeforce has put on.
Absolutely, and it's real great to see the fighters come through. And
a total legit stoppage, too, by the way. A totally legit stoppage. That wasn't 3 seconds left and sometimes you let them go. No, I thought it was totally legit.
Mm-hmm. And it does real good for the Strikeforce brand. If we have any hope of keeping Strikeforce as its own viable product, this show is definitely a good first step forward. But Paul Daley's Strikeforce debut did not end the way he would have liked. I'd hardly call it one of the worst debuts ever, though, and that's what we're going to get to. Finally, the best and worst MMA debuts and returns exclusively here on Roundtable Radio. You thought that we couldn't stretch out that debuts and returns topic even more. We're doing the MMA version now. So for debuts, it could either be someone's mixed martial art debut in their first fight or their first fight in a different promotion. First impressions are everything, and let's start off with the best. Who made the best first impressions in your opinion? Best debut, Will Brooks.
Sergey against Andrei Arlovsky. The fight we saw at Strikeforce.
Haratonov, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Well, he knocked out Arlovsky. Knocked him out cold, too. Knocked him the fuck out. I thought that was a great debut. You can't do much better than that than a first-round knockout against a guy who's a name. So
well, he's a name, but what would you say to people who are saying things like Andrei Arlovsky's getting into the Chuck Liddell-type territory where he has no chin anymore, he's getting knocked out every fight, he should just give it up. So do you consider that a real victory, or do you have anything to say as far as that criticism?
You got to beat the person in front of you, and that was the opponent he was giving it in the Grand Prix, and he kicked the shit out of him. So you can't really fault him for that. He took his opponent, did the best he could with it, and went and kept going. So good for Sergey. He's my pick.
Well, we were there in the Izod Center back in February, and I was very happy because as a fan of Pride, in the era where a lot of Pride fighters are going down, Crow Cop, Fedor, Wanderlei, and Big Nog are just full of injuries and on the shelf a lot of the time. And it was good to see someone from Pride come in and kick some serious ass and keep that alive in a sense. And Rodney LeConte, any ideas for best debut?
This guy you might have heard of, Hoyce Gracie. He came in and showed technique, and we're in an era where there were no rules, no gloves, no rounds.
Wait a minute. Are you talking about the Art Jimerson fight, the first UFC?
I'm talking about that whole show.
Okay. Because that fight was absurd.
His whole era, where he came in and showed this technique called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that nobody knew of at the time, and they're showing that this 170-pound guy can beat up and make guys miss as twice his size. Ken Shamrock type, who was a legit shoot fighter. What can I say about it? I mean, the guy changed the sport forever. I mean, he really showed people a technique that's, practiced and studied by everybody, and it basically made it a necessity for fighting. He changed the way people see a fight.
Well, he definitely made an impression in the first UFC tournament in terms of being a platform for Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, which was what UFC originally was intended to really be. It definitely succeeded. Ray Mercer made his MMA debut June of 2009 at Adrenaline MMA 4 when he knocked Tim Sylvia the fuck out. 9-second knockout, and Ray Mercer didn't exactly look like he was in the best shape, and former boxer didn't exactly get to show any ground skills if he hadn't any. But if you do notice, when he knocks him out with that huge right hook, he is going for a takedown. So maybe he had something. I'm not sure, but it didn't even matter because Tim Sylvia was just out.
I don't think that was Ray Mercer's MMA debut because was it his MMA debut against Kimbo Slice, who's making his MMA debut?
Well,
I was going to say the same thing. It was. It wasn't a pro
Not
debut.
technically. That was an exhibition fight, because I always wondered why that was never counted on Kimbo's record, and that's why. Apparently it was an exhibition quote. That's how it was promoted.
All right. Gina Carano, when she first debuted in Elite XC, it was one of those things. I remember seeing her, and of course, she's an attractive girl, so everyone's going to watch. And to see her Muay Thai skills at work, at that moment, you knew that, boom, a star was born. And it's just that Strikeforce hasn't been able to really capitalize on that.
What about June 2007's Dynamite USA show with Brock Lesnar? A lot of people said that, well, first of all, it seems like half of Brock's career he ends up fighting someone he wasn't supposed to fight. And in this instance, he was supposed to fight Hungman Choi. What a freak show that fight would have been. But instead, he was replaced after Choi did not get medical clearance with Min Soo Kim, Olympian, and not exactly the best MMA record either. So obviously, people are saying tomato can. But even if that's the case, he sure as fuck made a big first impression, don't you think, Rod?
Oh, yeah. I mean, people say whatever, it's a tomato can, but Brock's a guy who was 0-0. You could say all you want, but that's his first fight. He hasn't had any amateur fights, and this guy who, since amateur wrestling days hasn't been in real competition. A hell of a debut. He's probably the reason why people watch the show. And once he made his UFC debut, that was it. The rest is history.
Well, that was February 2008 at UFC 81 against Frank Mir, and we talked about that on our video show a couple years ago, and I said that it pretty much went perfectly for UFC in the sense that Lesnar looked great. He took down Frank Mir and was getting out of a lot of attempted holds. Of course, that caught up with him, but I still think that if Steve Mazzagatti hadn't unjustifiably, I might add, stop those punches and take away a point without even a warning, I think Brock would have finished the fight right then and there. But that being said, Mir, of course, knee-barred Lesnar, and even though that was like practically his only offense in the whole fight, you got Lesnar making a huge impression and the MMA guy winning over the wrestling guy. So I think they got the best of both worlds in that fight. What do you think, Will?
Brock showed that he can go, but at the same time, he stood in Frank Mir's guard like an idiot, and then did the worst thing he could have done, which was try to jump out of it when he could have just laid on top of him instead. He did the worst possible things you could have done as a mixed martial artist. So I'm not sure that's really a great debut, so to speak, when you fuck up royally like that. But he did look pretty good up until that point, though.
Fair enough. However, let's go to the opposite side of the coin, the worst debuts, and one of the ones I want to talk about right off the bat is Bobby Lashley. He just fought a guy who's a natural middleweight, John Ott, who, much like Keith Jardine we talked about earlier, was a last-minute replacement, and this aired on HDNet in March for Titan Fighting Championship. Bobby Lashley coming off a loss to Chad Griggs, which was ended due to exhaustion pretty much and awarded to Griggs. That was his first loss. He had a lot to prove here as Strikeforce let his contract run up without renewing it. He had to make this comeback because people were really trashing him and saying that he should go back to wrestling. He's not improving. He's not doing any better, blah, blah, blah. And you know what? This fight didn't disprove that either. He took down Ott, sure, and he landed a bunch of elbows and punches, but he just really exposed himself as being able to do pretty much just that. He didn't go for any submissions. He seemed lost on the ground, and he was clearly blown up and exhausted, even though he claimed he didn't in the post-fight interview, sure. But even worse, the announcers were burying him the entire time, just like, Lashley does not look good. Lashley, this was horrible. This was blah, blah, blah. It was just pretty pathetic and didn't do him any favors.
I'll definitely have to agree with you on the Lashley thing, because I wasn't a huge Lashley fan even when he was in wrestling. I'm always happy for people getting, out of wrestling and doing something that maybe they want to do, but I think with Lashley...
like Batista.
Yeah.
Whoops.
It was just painfully obvious that he wanted to go the Brock route, and my problem with Lashley is that he really, thinks he's a lot better than he is. I mean, he just doesn't have the appeal that, that Brock Lesnar has. And this showed why. I mean, he was out there to prove that he could be out there with, the number one guys, and he can't even beat guys who are, top 20.
Top 20? He couldn't even beat a guy who normally isn't even in his own weight class.
Yeah, so I think if you threw him in the Grand Prix, you threw him in UFC heavyweight division, he would get eaten up within the first few minutes. But I want to say, speaking of the Strikeforce, Dan Henderson getting dominated by Jake Shields in a match where people really thought that, including myself, that Henderson was just going to destroy Jake Shields. Jake Shields doesn't hide the fact that his striking is less than perfect, but he is good on the ground, and so is Dan Henderson. Dan Henderson, Olympic alternate, years of experience. And I thought, just the way they were building him up, they were building Dan Henderson as a new flag bearer of Strikeforce, like they always do.
Well, he was also, you should point out, coming off the UFC 100 victory over Michael Bisping. That was pretty big.
Right, and it was big. And, I felt like he thought he was very big. And he came into the fight, I guess, natural middleweight, and he got dominated. Yeah, I mean, he got the better of Jake Shields in the first few minutes. But after that, I mean, Shields was taking him down, and Shields was relentless. And he really made Dan Henderson look like an amateur out there. And I didn't even recognize Dan Henderson. He was on his back so much. I think after a while, it really looked like Jake Shields was in a sparring session with someone in high school who's just trying to get into MMA for the first time. It was, it really was not the greatest debut for Dan Henderson, but I was really happy to see Jake Shields, perform the way he did.
Well, Brooks, he's talking about your boy, Dan Henderson, but Jake Shields, I don't think, made a huge impression in his UFC debut against Martin Kampmann either this past October at UFC 121. Of course, people were saying maybe the weight cut to welterweight was too much for him and it took a lot out of him, but people think that Kampmann won that fight. A lot of people do. He did not get the decision. Shields did, but people think he just squeaked by the skin of his teeth.
I thought he actually lost to Martin Kampmann personally, but that's just my opinion. But Dan Henderson is the best American mixed martial artist of all time next to Randy Couture. So come on, show some respect, man.
Hey, that doesn't change the fact that he got dominated.
I'm just saying. He's an old man. Leave him alone. I know we're on the world debuts right now, but I just thought of another good debut was, even though he's fought a scrub, how about Herschel Walker?
Yeah,
he looked pretty good for an old man, first fight ever. But,
well, he looked great.
He looked good, even though his opponent was like 1-2 or something like that.
Right. Well, I have two answers for the worst debut. I have Sokoju, when he debuted against Machida, and Machida made him look really stupid. And he came in really hot after winning two five fights, and then he faced Machida, and Machida made him look really, really bad. Vanderlei Silva at UFC Brazil, losing in 44 seconds against Vita Belfort.
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty bad.
Renzo Gracie made his UFC debut last April in Abu Dhabi at UFC 112 against Matt Hughes. Matt Hughes almost became, I guess, the American Sakuraba in the sense, he was pretty much the Gracie killer in this fight, and we were looking forward to Renzo Gracie's debut. Rodney, we shot some scenes for Grappling Kings over at his school in New York, and he's a cool guy, but he did not look good in this fight. He looked old. He didn't look motivated. What'd you think of that fight?
It was painful. I mean, I thought the first round he looked pretty good, but this was probably the fight I was most excited to see on that whole card. I remember watching Enzo win World Combat Championship, and he looked like a more vicious version of Royce Gracie. Just all his sound bites, the way he was building up the fight. And I was like, wow, he's really taking this thing seriously. And I actually, in my mind, thought that he could do pretty well in the welterweight division. But once the second round came along, I don't know how much he was training, but that just shows that not everyone could be Henderson and Randy Couture fighting at 40 years old.
Speaking of Randy Couture, his debut in UFC was back in 1997, May, UFC 13. You thought that Brock Lesnar was the first professional wrestler Couture fought in the octagon? You're wrong. He fought Ludwig Borga. Tony Halme made his MMA debut and his only MMA fight against Randy Couture. Even though he had a boxing record over in Finland, did not look good in this fight at all. Couture pretty much did the same thing that he did against James Toney last August at UFC 118, which was also pathetic. Take him down, choke him out. It's pretty simple. Randy Couture is someone that I think should be on the tip of everyone's tongues when we move on to the returns, because I think he's got the best return in MMA history when he came back to fight Tim Sylvia. March 2007, UFC 68. What was pretty much MMA's Rocky Balboa moment. Randy Couture comes out of retirement for a year and defeats the much vilified and hated by me heavyweight champion Tim Sylvia. And even though the fight went the distance, it looked like in those first few seconds, Rodney, that he was going to knock Tim Sylvia out.
Yeah, I remember, Erich, watching that in my room, and me and you jumped up once he landed that shot. Because when the fight was made, I was like, really? I'm like, because the last thing that I remember was Couture getting knocked out by Chuck Liddell.
Right, and Sylvia sucked.
Yeah, I was not a big Tim Sylvia fan at all, but the whole 25 minutes was just a joy to watch. Just watch Couture beat him on the ground, really outbox this big, slow giant, and really showed that, like, hey, this guy is reborn, rededicated, and just the fact that he can jump up to heavyweight and beat the champion after retiring and coming back, it was really one of the more proud moments of MMA, really a highlight in the UFC, highlighting Randy Couture's career.
Randy Couture does have the greatest return of all time, and you're right. That punch he lands in the first round, you guys just jumped up, I jumped up, I think the whole arena jumped up. It was the biggest holy shit moment in mixed martial arts.
The earth almost shifted off its axis with all the people jumping up at that moment.
And it's probably the most, impactful punch ever that wasn't a knockout. In terms of just, a wow and impact of what it led to, into the UFC. It was just holy shit, wow. What the hell is Tim Sylvia doing?
Definitely MMA's feel-good moment. But what about the man who took the belt from him a few years later? Brock Lesnar's comeback against Shane Carwin back in July 2010. UFC 116, he gets destroyed in the first round. Shane Carwin pretty much, I don't think anybody watching that would have been surprised had the referee ended it with all those strikes via TKO. I guess you could make a little argument, but I don't think we would have been surprised. It looked like it was about to happen, but he survives. Carwin gasses himself out, and Lesnar comes back, takes down Carwin, and this is, like I said, after his bout with diverticulosis, his hole in his intestines. We didn't know if he'd even fight again. He was out about a year, and he comes back in the second round, and not only does he beat Carwin by submission of all things, head and arm triangle, that was pretty good, wasn't it?
That was a great return as well. It's not as good as Randy's, but definitely a really good return. Good for Brock for getting that submission.
As a Brock fan, it was just a really, really scary, intense moment. I remember just how happy and relieved. Well, once Brock won, I felt like I was in the fight and I won. It's the first time I really didn't get pummeled like that. And I was a little scared because Shane Carwin was like 12-0, all first-round knockouts. So you knew that those 5 XL hands were coming at Brock, and no one knew how Brock was going to take it. But he took it, he recovered. Good refereeing for once, not stopping it. Brock was staying active on the bottom. Lots of big pythons against Carwin's neck.
Most of the fights we've talked about so far in the best and worst returns and debuts have been heavyweight fights, but that's going to change, at least on my end, for the last section here for worst returns, because there's 2 names that pop up in my head immediately, Tito Ortiz and Ken Shamrock, both in and of themselves. Ken Shamrock coming back to UFC in July 2006, one of the many hyped fights he had with Tito Ortiz, this being the second. At UFC 61, Shamrock, of course, this legend in UFC, one of the first people inducted in the Hall of Fame from the old days of UFC, back when it was SEG owned. In this case, he got knocked out in the light heavyweight division in, a little over a minute? Now, a lot of people were disputing that they could have given it a few more seconds, but I don't know. Ortiz managed to spank Ken Shamrock pretty good even after that in their next match, so probably would have ended the same way no matter what. I thought that was a pretty lame comeback, but what do you expect from Ken Shamrock at this point in his career? What else is on your mind for worst return, Will Brooks?
Frank Mir coming back after his motorcycle accident, losing to Marcio Cruz. Before he fought Brock, he was like 2 for 5 or whatever it was. He was awful.
Yeah, his streak wasn't pretty good until he fought Brock.
So I just want to share some of my best returns real quick. Joe Lazan, when he basically destroyed at the UFC 118 in his hometown Boston against Gabe Rudiger. Vitor Belfort coming back and just mantling Rich Franklin, which I thought was very good. It showed how quick his hands are, to maybe those who haven't seen him. And
well, I'm a big Vitor Belfort fan, but I know he destroyed Rich Franklin, but I didn't think it was that blow-away of victory myself. I guess I'm hoping that he opens up his head with his knee and there's meat hanging off Rich Franklin's head.
Oh, boy. Like Marvin Eastman, huh?
Yeah. I don't think I'll ever forget that visual. Remember when we were watching that?
Yeah, that was bad. This fellow Brazilian, Vanderlei Silva, coming back at UFC 79, and even though he didn't get his hand raised against Chuck Liddell, it was pretty much like a mega fight, even though it wasn't even the main event. Like these two guys that people want to see fight for years, and finally they fought and it lived up to the expectations. These guys put on a great fight, one of the greater fights of both men's career. But for the worst return, Brandon Vera, after his contract dispute with UFC, he's had manager problems. He looked like a prospect. People say that a few years ago he was the John Jones of the heavyweight division, breaking Tim Sylvia's arm, knocking out Frank Mir, choking people out. He was doing good. And then he comes back against Tim Sylvia and lets Tim Sylvia implement his game plan and lets Tim Sylvia control him the whole time. And then after that, goes ahead and gets stopped.
Controlling him is a nice way of saying sitting on him for 3 rounds, sitting on him for 5 rounds.
Well, I mean, he was just letting Tim Sylvia clinch him and hold him up against the fence. And Brandon Vera had no answer to that. And, it just looks like since he came back, he hasn't been motivated. He even tried dropping down to light heavyweight and hasn't really been successful at that. He keeps saying the truth is back, the truth is back. Where is the truth? What is the truth? You show me the truth.
One of the most hyped in UFC history, UFC 60 back in May 2006. I think you know what I'm going for, Rodney, because it was the big welterweight title fight. Matt Hughes defending against the returning Royce Gracie. I can't remember another fight I was so hyped for back then. I was really looking forward to that as an old school UFC fan, and it was really a clash of styles, a clash of generations. Exactly. And, oh, man. For those who remember the early days of UFC, like you were just talking about, Rodney, and the impression that Royce Gracie made, it was really rather sad. You could definitely see, and I mean on Gracie's part, how he performed, because Matt Hughes is easily, of course, as we all know, one of the best fighters of all time. When Brock Lesnar brought him in to train on Ultimate Fighter, could you imagine being one of those guys? How intimidated that was?
Oh, man, yeah.
He just totally dominated Royce Gracie, and there's nothing more to add to it. He had everything. So any thoughts on Royce Gracie's failed return, only his second loss ever?
It just shows how far the sport has come along with the fact that Matt Hughes was able to avoid Royce Gracie's guard, and the fact that the crowd was on edge, and they were really ready to cheer the second that Royce had him in his guard. And that was really, this shows the fan base of Gracie. That people were really looking forward to the groundwork, whereas the earlier UFC, no one really knew what was going on. But now they know that legend of Royce and seeing him clash, they didn't just give him someone who's top 5 in the welterweight division. They gave him Matt Hughes at that time, who was the GSP of the welterweight division. Mm-hmm. So I thought it was a very interesting match. It was very well put together, and that was really in the upstart of the boom period of the UFC. And
they really marketed it well, with Hughes just being the disrespectful prick. This is the guy who laid down the foundation for everything that he's competing in right now, and he didn't respect him at all, and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, it was built up very well. I mean, both of them are good mouthpieces. Royce Gracie building up as this is my house, I built it. I would like to see a Royce fight, one more fight, but I don't even see anyone in the welterweight division that he could defeat at this point.
No. I think if he did end up fighting in Brazil, which Dana White has said is not going to happen, it would be some sort of showcase fight, let's say, and that's a nice way of putting
Shamrock.
Well, see, like Dan Severn came out and said that he wanted to fight him, and that wouldn't even happen because they're across weight divisions now. It's different. I don't think they'd make an exception in this case. I don't know. But either way, Dana White said no, unfortunately. But you talked about Dan Henderson's Strikeforce debut. He's rebounded since then, and now he's the light heavyweight champion. Last time we talked about MMA a few weeks ago, we talked about the potential fight with Fedor Emelianenko that Strikeforce is trying to set up, and it's more or less official, but there's a catch. A catch. Wait. It's going to be at 220. M1 Global wants to fight at 220. Dan Henderson's essentially going to be fighting at heavyweight now for this fight, and I think, frankly, that takes away any interest that I had in this fight, because when we talked about it, the whole thing was Fedor has lost 2 fights in a row. He doesn't look motivated. He should probably drop to light heavyweight because he's fighting guys who are a lot bigger than him, and he's been fighting at heavyweight his entire career, which has been so long at this point. He should just have this new challenge at the light heavyweight, see how he does. And I thought, you know what? If they made this a title fight, I'd want to see it. This could be Fedor's comeback fight. But you know what? Now, taking that out of the equation, now it's in the heavyweight division, I just don't see what the appeal is anymore. What's Fedor got to gain? He's got everything to lose again. And if he wins, so what? I don't know. I think that this took a lot away. So what do you guys think? Does the new catch weight at 220 change the dynamic of this fight at all, Will Brooks?
Not really, being that Fedor fights at 220 anyway. I don't get what the catch is. But,
well, the catch is that it's not going to be in the light heavyweight division like we were speculating before, so it's not even going to be for the title or anything like that.
Yeah, but really, to me, this I don't even care about this fight. I mean, I want to see it because of the novelty of seeing 2 really all-time greats, especially 2 pride greats going at it. That's kind of cool, but other than that, I really don't care. It has no effect on anything, really.
Okay, well, if you're going for a name versus a name, doesn't it make you think that it's a shame that Couture is retiring? Couldn't they just make him and Fedor, since they're both under the same banner at this point? I mean, really, if Fedor is going to retire at any point soon, and he keeps saying he is, don't you think that it could be Couture and Fedor, one last fight? They could call it, like, let's say UFC 143, one last fight. Fedor and Couture's retirement fight. See who is going to come out victorious in this fight that never happened. I don't know. Your thoughts on Henderson and Fedor now, Rodney?
I don't know. I don't think that Fedor is ever going to drop down to light heavyweight, especially at this stage of his career, unless he was going for a rebirth, if you will, or reassurance of his career. I knew he was towards the end of it, and dropping down to light heavyweight would take a toll on his body and really require a lot of dedication. Who knows how he even handles a weight cut? And now he's fighting a middleweight at heavyweight. Hey, I'm still going to watch the fight. It's still 2 big names in our sport. I'm interested to see how Dan Henderson's going to look at 220. I mean, I'm sure that's his natural weight. So, for him, this could be just like going another day of practice. So, hopefully, after this fight, he'll be able to go back down to 205 to defend his title successfully.
I'm sure. I think that being at this weight class has taken any gain that either could have had away from it. Like, Dan Henderson beats Fedor, I guess it's okay, but I mean, he loses, he's the champ, it's kind of lame. Fedor beats him, I don't know. I just feel weird about it. But speaking of Strikeforce heavyweights, Batista's come out on TMZ recently and said that his potential Strikeforce deal is dead on the water since Strikeforce got purchased by Zuffa. Are you upset, Rodney? Is Batista ever going to fight in MMA?
Sure, but not in Strikeforce, not in UFC. I mean, at this point, he could try for Bellator, but Strikeforce was still a promotion, I think, goofy enough to do it.
They still are.
But, I mean, now that they're owned by Zuffa, I don't think it's going to happen. Even the women's divisions are in jeopardy.
Well, they lined up Gina Carano's next fight, and I don't know what's going on with Cyborg, but unfortunately something that isn't going to happen for sure is John Jones defending his light heavyweight title against Rashad Evans this August. Now, apparently they were trying to set it up for Philadelphia, which is great because so far that card is pretty fucking iffy, if to say the least. I mean, Yoshihiro Akiyama versus Vitor Belfort's an okay fight, but apparently John Jones and Rashad Evans was supposed to be the main event, and that's cool. I would have definitely gone to that, but John Jones is hurt. Really sucks because they were really building on this drama now of Rashad Evans leaving Greg Jackson's camp. Now there's a rift between them. They forgot me in favor of the new younger guy. Now it's personal, blah, blah, blah. But instead, Rashad Evans will be fighting Phil Davis. I'm very disappointed. Your thoughts, Will Brooks?
Yeah, I would have loved to see Bones Jones fight in Philadelphia, my adopted home. But to get injured, man, it just sucks.
Evans and Phil Davis is a good fight. But it's not, doesn't have the drama, doesn't have the intrigue that John Jones and Evans had, especially.
I don't think that's a pay-per-view main event, like maybe a fight night or something.
Not a pay-per-view event, not like one in Philly, nonetheless.
Yeah.
I was just very intrigued just by the whole drama and how these guys were kind of joking around and still talking at first in the build-up to John Jones and Shogun Hua fight. But then, this trash talking and the bad blood, and we never really seen this between in the camp before. This is the first time we opened up doors as to, hey, in camps, two fighters in the same weight class can fight each other. It's just going to happen, especially if they're good. And one of the first times I can remember, probably the biggest incident in MMA that this is happening, and now it's not happening. It's disappointing, especially since John Jones was on such a momentum roll, and now he finally became champ. It's sad to see him get injured.
Definitely is, but on the bright side, we have Saturday to look forward to. Rogers Center in Toronto, UFC 129, the biggest UFC show literally ever. 55,000 tickets sold out, and I will be there. I can't wait because this card is fucking sick.
Primetime is really, really doing its job and giving you the idea that Jake Shields could win this fight.
I can't take credit for this, but I read a line somewhere that I thought was hilarious, and that was that GSP's camp is doing a better job of making you believe Jake Shields can win than Jake Shields' camp.
But, Stephen Gracie seems pretty confident. Jake Shields seems pretty confident, even though Dan Henderson is great. Dan Henderson is not GSP, and I really thought that Dan Henderson was going to run over Jake Shields. And it's what happened with that fight. This guy has won 15 fights in a row for a reason, but I do think he's facing a different beast in George St. Pierre. I just want it to be an intriguing fight, and I'm a huge GSP fan, but I'm not going to be completely disappointed if Jake Shields happens to pull off a submission because of something unexpected and something that people could be talking about for years to come, and let's see if Jake Shields could do something that nobody since Matt Serra 4 years ago did. Jesus Christ, 4 years ago already.
I know, and when they do the primetime series, and it makes you think, wow, I can't even remember the last time this guy's lost a round, let alone a fight.
Last time he lost a round was UFC 74 against Josh Koscheck.
My God.
Yeah. And you saw what happened the second time he fought Josh Koscheck. It was a massacre.
Well, don't say that Jake Shields is going to win because I don't want to be caught in the riot in Canada when that happens. Besides, you only like him because you have a French name.
I think that Jake Shields will get punched in the face repeatedly, and I would take my belt and win it a record 7 times.
And then I would do some gymnastics.
GSP's going to wipe the floor with Jake Shields. I think GSP will take him down at one point and kick the shit out of him on the ground, too, just to see if he can do it.
Now, I like the primetime series, and it's great hype, but I'm just sad that they put on the countdown show. Actually, it's on right now at fucking midnight. But I'm just sad that so many other great fights are getting lost in the shuffle, really, because that's what all the ads are, GSP Shields, GSP Shields. And, it's a great fight, fine. It's the main event of their biggest show ever, great. But Jose Aldo, one of my fucking favorites, is making his debut defending the featherweight title. I cannot wait. So your thoughts on that, Will Brooks?
Jose Aldo is probably one of the pound-for-pound best fighters in the world. He's probably behind only GSP and Silva. Maybe Edgar if you really want to go there. I don't think Cain Velasquez, but maybe. This next card has the top 2 fights, has 2 championship bouts, and the 2 of them are 2 of the best fighters in the world. And Jose Aldo is going to wipe the floor with Mark Hominick very easily. It's going to be pretty disgusting. Jose Aldo is the shit, and I can't wait for the whole world to find out as well.
Yeah, man. I was supposed to see him fight on January 1st. That was the card main evented by the first Edgar Maynard fight. And I was very disappointed that he didn't get the spotlight on that night because he had to bow out due to injury. But in addition to that, we've also got Ben Henderson fighting, another favorite of mine from WEC. I thought he had fight of the year last year with Anthony Pettis in December. Vladimir Matyushenko, another one of my favorites, former IFL light heavyweight champion. But getting back to Jose Aldo, Rod, your thoughts on his title defense against Mark Hominick. First featherweight title fight in UFC.
It is, and he's definitely one of the best pound for pound. I think he's ranked third behind GSP and Anderson Silva. It's going to suck that he's going to be booed because he's fighting a Canadian. But, man, people are good. People who have not seen Jose Aldo fight are in for a treat. These guys' leg kicks are probably as devastating as Crow Cups was back in the day. He's just a phenomenal athlete, trains with phenomenal guys. And Mark Hominick, he's a good striker. He really talks himself up. His camp firmly believes that he's going to win this fight. But it is Jose Aldo. I don't see Aldo losing at all.
Unfortunately, like I said, all these fights are getting lost in the hype for GSP Shields, but I can't believe that more focus has not gone on the Randy Couture-Lyoto Machida fight because we all knew, even going into this, that he did not have that many fights left, but he has come out and said, win, lose, or draw, I am retiring. So Randy Couture, one of my favorite fighters, as you said, Will Brooks, probably the best American MMA fighter ever, his last fight. So I was hoping that would get a little more spotlight, especially after he was in the #1 movie in America at one point last year, The Expendables, which was also awesome. Randy Couture's last fight with Lyoto Machida. Is Machida going to get back on track after his couple-fight losing streak?
Randy is really motivated for this fight. He feels he has the game plan. He has the tools to figure out Machida and work his style to counter Machida's. But Machida is a really crafty fighter. He's done very good against wrestlers. I'm going to have to go with Machida. I want Randy, but Machida's a devastating striker. Too much for Randy, I think.
Randy's going to lose. It kind of sucks saying that. I love Randy Couture. He's like my hero. But no, I think he's going to lose.
I hope he goes out with a victory just because maybe that'll raise the possibility of one last fight against Fedor. I got the idea in my head before, and I'm sticking with it. I think that would be the way to go out. Machida would look real bad after 3 losses in a row, and that wouldn't be particularly good, especially with how behind him they were when he won the title, and the Machida era has begun, and didn't quite last. Neither did Shogun either, for that matter, but I'd still like to see Couture go out with a victory. Just sucks that all these shows that I'm going to end up having last fights for people. Crow Cop and almost Fedor and now Couture. It's almost like the end of an era, but the MMA era on this show is ending at the moment. And before we move on to pro wrestling, it is time for the news. Some of the news items from WrestlingRoundtable.com. TNA President Dixie Carter's mother, Janice, Executive Vice President of Pana Energy, the financiers of TNA, has stated that the company needs a major change, including rebranding, which might possibly lead to a name change. Couldn't get any worse than TNA in the first place. What were they thinking? They have also released Jay Lethal recently. In the main event of the Pro Wrestling Fusion show in Jacksonville, Florida, Saturday night, The Sheik defeated Colt Cabana to win the NWA title. The Sheik, be not Iron, Original, or Adnan, did, however, consider it a huge victory over the Jews. Road Warrior Animal was briefly hospitalized this past weekend with bronchitis, possibly residuals of all the Hawk impressions he was doing at his Hall of Fame speech. AAA luchador Charlie Manson was arrested and charged Sunday with assaulting 2 of the officers, reportedly attempting to arrest them and an underage friend for being drunk in public. A fight broke out, resulting in both officers being sent to the hospital. Manson faces up to 15 years in prison. On August 27th, New Japan, All Japan, and Noah will be co-promoting a charity event at Japan's Tokyo Nippon Budokan, with proceeds going to the victims and areas of the recent earthquake and tsunami disasters. Former WWE diva Shelly Martinez has been nominated for PETA's Sexiest Vegetarian Next Door 2011 award. Clearly, they're not counting her consuming my huge sausage. Just some of the news stories over at WrestlingRoundtable.com, and more to come this week. And before we get to pro wrestling, want to read the results of one of our latest polls. Thoughts on Zuffa purchasing Strikeforce? You voted over at WrestlingRoundtable.com on what you thought of this huge move in mixed martial arts. 17% of you said it doesn't make a difference because Strikeforce was nothing in the first place. The same percentage, 17%, also voted for it was bad for UFC because now they have no competition. Moving on up in the results, 32% of you said it was good for UFC and good for MMA in general. 34% in first place beyond that. 34% of you said it was good for UFC but bad for MMA. We talked about the first Strikeforce card on Showtime since Zuffa being the new owners, and it seemed to have worked out so far, but I guess time will tell. Those were your impressions. And there are other polls going on right now at WrestlingRoundtable.com. We're going to talk about pro wrestling now, and one of the latest major shows was TNA's Lockdown pay-per-view, coming to us from the U.S. Bank Arena in Cincinnati, Ohio. It looked to me as if, in typical TNA fashion, that they moved the audience, or at least most of them, to one side of the arena, the hardcam side. But you know what? It's a good move. It worked. I don't know about you, Corey, but being that they tape in Orlando at the Impact Zone every week, it was a nice change of pace. It looked like almost like a Nitro-sized crowd. There were a lot of people there.
Yeah, it was actually a good pay-per-view. Everything made sense. I really was surprised by this. This was a well-put-together pay-per-view. There were only one or two spots where I felt confused. And for TNA, that's extremely good news.
Well, let's start with the pre-show. You enjoyed the pre-show match with Devon, so let's hear about that.
Devon defeated Anarquia, who is Hernandez's new tag team partner. This was a fun match. It was very short. Devon just beat the hell out of Anarquia, and this was really fun. There was no storyline to it, but it was a very nice exhibition match.
Well, the opener of Lockdown was the X Division Escape the Cage match. X Division has been the source of some disruption backstage lately. A lot of the wrestlers upset with pay. If you knew the numbers, you wouldn't be able to blame them. But did they go out and give it their all in this six-way anyway, Corey?
This was a well-put-together match. It saw Robbie E. versus Jay Lethal in what would be his swan song, versus Max and Jeremy Buck, versus Suicide, versus Chris Sabin, versus Brian Kendrick, versus Amazing Red. Max Buck won the match. I wasn't too pleased with Max Buck winning. I kind of wanted to see Brian Kendrick win, but it made sense. A lot of this match focused on the new rivalry between Max and Jeremy Buck, so there was a lot of tension going in there. And this was a fun match to watch, and I thought it was very high energy, and it was good. This is what TNA used to be about.
If the X Division wrestlers are upset about pay, I guess that must mean that Brian Kendrick's price wasn't right.
No, I would say not.
Madison Rayne lost the Knockouts title to Mickie James in, I can't decide who's hotter. Oh yeah, there's a wrestling match involved. But seems like Mickie James is still suffering from her shoulder injury, so it was rather brief. Did it matter, and how was the match anyway, Corey?
Mickie carried herself off like she wasn't injured, and she didn't have to worry about it. It was only a 90-second match. It was a really good match. It was wrestling-based, and I really appreciate that out of the females. I really do. And for the record, Mickie was the hotter one. So
well, if that's the case, then the stipulation of the loser gets shaved, I would have changed it a little bit. I don't think she would have been shaving her head. Samoa Joe defeated the Pope, moving on in a match that Bill Treadway really loved. Bill Treadway has full coverage and details in our TNA Lockdown recap over at WrestlingRoundtable.com. He loved the Joe Pope match. Freudian slip there. So what'd you think of Joe defeating Pope?
That was a good match, too. I really loved how they let Joe just go out and beat the hell out of Pope D'Angelo. I really got a chance to see the best out of both wrestlers. They both ended up looking really good. This was a very sound, very technical match. and probably one of the best matches on the card. I really enjoyed it.
Matt Morgan got the win over Hernandez. Yet another match between these two in their feud. I don't know if it's the blow-off. It seems like it should have been, but what do you think, Corey? Another match that Bill Treadway enjoyed.
This was an okay match, not as good as the previous match, but again we got to see the better moves out of Hernandez and Matt Morgan. And I really do hope that this is the blow-off to their feud, because the feud itself was really going nowhere. But this was a nice match. We could have done without the little bit at the end with the girls coming in to fight over seemingly nothing, but this was a fun match.
Jeff Jarrett got what I believe is the third pay-per-view victory in a row over Kurt Angle. That's pretty ridiculous. But that being said, the Ultra Male Rules 2 out of 3 Falls match, that's such a great title. I'm not even being sarcastic there. I think that's hilarious. Now, Kurt Angle tweeted, I guess, at a point when his account wasn't hacked, that this match was as good as his WrestleMania match with Shawn Michaels years ago. I wouldn't go that far. I thought it was good, but I cringed at least twice in this match, Corey. Actually, about 3 times with moves that Angle is doing off the top rope in cage matches or off the top of the cage. He's just a fucking maniac. He's going to end up in a wheelchair. I've been saying it for years, and so have other people on the show, but there were a couple times when he looked like he was going to break his fucking neck doing this stuff. In fact, pretty much every time he jumped off with these high spots, it would look dangerous, whether it was the slip on the pop-up suplex and landing awkwardly, or the what was supposed to have been, I believe, a power bomb off the top rope and looked like Angle was trying for a Frankenstein, or Jarrett definitely was not. And then the moonsault, which didn't go straight backwards either. This guy needs to stop taking these risks. I mean, I guess he feels he needs to do it to have a great match, but I think the match was pretty good regardless. I loved the first fall.
I'd say up until the last 15 minutes of the match, it was really solid. I thought it was very technical. Right until the last 15 minutes, this was a really good technical match. And it was really great to see both Jeff Jarrett and Kurt Angle try and put on the best match possible. The last 15 minutes, though, did get confusing when suddenly Gunner comes out with a chair and Brooke Hogan tries to stop him, and then Karen Angle pulls out Jeff Jarrett.
Well, I'll tell you what, the first fall, like I was saying, was when Jarrett went for the Jujikatame, which is, in wrestling talk, the cross arm breaker, and Angle did that sweet sweep, turning it around into the ankle lock. I thought that was great. And then Jarrett using the tights to pull up on Angle for the roll-up. Jarrett, people give him shit all the time for being the owner and whatever, but he's always been a solid wrestler in my opinion, and at least decent, and he did a great job as the heel in this match between pulling the tights to get the pinfall. You may remember the spot where Angle came back into the cage when he could have walked out, and he faced off with Jarrett, and Jarrett said, "Bring it on," and then he ran away. I thought Jarrett was really good in this match. Jeremy Borash was fucking not. With his late announcing on the second fall, everyone was wondering whether it actually fucking happened or not. Good job there, dumbass. But I love the finish. I love the visual of the tug of war where he's got the ankle lock on Jarrett and Karen's trying to pull him out. I still think it's fucking weird that these freaky wrestling people need to play out their real-life relationship on TV and make it a storyline. I think it's just fucking weird seeing Jarrett and Karen Angle tongue kiss on TV and that sort of shit. But that being said, like I said, the finish was really good, I thought, and Karen slamming the door into Kurt Angle's head to win. I really enjoyed the match.
The match was really good. The last 15 minutes, like I said, was confusing, but outside of that, which is just a small nitpick if you think about it, it was a sound technical match. Jeff Jarrett really did his best in it. You could see how good of a heel he is in this match. And Angle was just on his A game that whole evening. That was really cool out of him. I didn't like the spot where he jumped off the cage and almost killed himself, but the rest of the match I thought was really good. This is what TNA needs to do more often.
The Hodge mentioned in our chat room Kurt Angle doing the RKO. Yes, that was very cute. Speaking of which, let's bring on Will Vafides. Hello, Will.
Hello, everyone.
The title match, a 3-way. Sting defending against Rob Van Dam and Mr. Anderson, which is probably what they should have done last time, as we talked about on the pay-per-view previous to this when Jeff Hardy showed up in the condition that he did. But I guess better late than never. How did this three-way end up, Will Vafides?
I thought it was kind of weird because it was a very, very short match. I liked the ending with Hogan. They're definitely teasing.
Not as short
Hogan.
as the last time.
No, thank God for that. I'm still trying to get that out of my head. Very short, but still well-paced. And, again, I like the setup with, RVD. I thought it was a little quick of an ending. So, I honestly, I don't think it was the best match. Definitely not. They're just really trying to tease Sting and Hogan. That's really the main thing out of the match. So, honestly, the other two combatants didn't even need to be there. So, that's why it wasn't that important to me.
Short but well-paced, kind of like Snooki. Your thoughts, Corey, on the three-way title match?
There's one spot in this match that I loved. There's a spot where Sting slapped on the Scorpion Deathlock onto RVD and Mr. Anderson. I thought this was a really cool visual.
And done. But Natalya has done it twice. So that's why it's nothing new. And I understand that spot, but Sting copied that. So nothing new.
That may be, but it was still a cool visual.
Bret Hart did the sharpshooter after the Scorpion Deathlock, so maybe it was Sting's turn to copy a Hart this time. Who knows?
Okay.
Well, in this instance, they've come full circle, and it was a cool visual, and one of the best spots in the match. The ending was a little bit convoluted with the lead pipe and Hulk Hogan, but the rest of the match I thought was pretty exciting.
Lethal Lockdown, which is pretty much TNA's version of War Games, ended the show with Immortal versus Fortune. AJ Styles made his big comeback to a big pop. Abyss, all he wants for Christmas is his two front teeth. And Ric Flair just looks like a fucking corpse out there. It's really sad that he's got this hair that looks like it's about to fall out, bleeding all over with his selling. Does he really need to be doing this anymore?
No, he needs to go home.
Okay, well, let's see what else you think about this match. Corey, Chris Daniels doing big high spots that can hurt himself, and he's still under ROH contract. It's funny how he does it for them, but anyway. Your thoughts on Lethal Lockdown?
I did think it was interesting that Jeremy Borash fucked up his name. The whole pay-per-view line, you see these vignettes of Christopher Daniels, and he says, "My name is Daniels." All the other wrestlers get it right. He's Daniels, he's Daniels, he's Daniels. As soon as he comes out to the ring, and now entering the ring, Christopher Daniels, the fallen angel. Christopher looks at the ceiling like, really? I thought we've been over this. Outside of that, it wasn't the best match on the card, but it wasn't a bad match either. It was pretty exciting in some spots. We could have done without Ric Flair at all, and we could have done without Matt Hardy just stumbling around the ring. The rest of the match, though, I think kept to an even tempo, and the part where AJ came back, that was the best part. I absolutely loved his comeback. That was shocking. The crowd roared. I haven't heard a crowd roar like that for TNA in ages. And again, this pay-per-view reminded me of what TNA used to be and what they need to become again if they want to stay alive. This was a good show.
Well, if nothing else, at least Bully Ray's lost a lot of weight. Your thoughts on Lethal Lockdown, Will Vafides?
I actually really loved it, and what I like about Ric Flair being in the match is that it makes the whole pay-per-view a little more special when you have a legend on the card.
It gives him credibility.
It gives it a little more credibility, which is why I think Ric Flair in the match was a good idea, and it builds that immortal brand. I mean, after all, he built Fortune. He's trying to break it down. He's using these guys. I thought it was a very good match. I was very entertained by the match. I actually really liked it. I think it was well-paced. I loved the Bully Ray spot where he was pretty much destroying everybody until AJ Styles came out. I loved that ending. That was just like Bully Ray is just destroying them, not even pinning them. He's really like putting a lot of force with using that Kindle stick. And then when AJ Styles came out, now from what I heard, he was not seen the entire weekend of their events until he popped out of the curtain. So I think that's a good way of suspense where he's not even around the area, no one's seen him, and then he pops out for that last second. And that just proves right there AJ Styles can be built as the top draw for that company based on that crowd reaction, because that's a paid audience that loved him. Great ending to the show. AJ Styles needs to be built up to be the world champion, and that's how it should be. And I don't understand what they're waiting for. I didn't like the idea of him winning because it makes no sense.
Of who winning? I think your phone cut off. I didn't catch that.
The Buck from the X Division match, that makes no sense at all. Because Robbie E is more built up than him, and for some reason he wins. I don't get that.
and that Hernandez didn't win but they're building him too. So there were just some things that didn't make sense on that card, but I thought the ending of the show was very, very well done. I liked it. I liked that match.
Unfortunately, some things don't have good endings, and that's the life of Larry Sweeney I'm referring to. Larry Sweeney recently died. If you don't know who Larry Sweeney is, he was a pro wrestler / manager. I think he was more known for managing, really, in the independent circuit, primarily Chikara, Ring of Honor, and the like. Really dropped off the radar in the past couple of years, though, because he had a lot of issues with bipolar disorder or drugs and things like that. And I wanted to mention it at least on the show because I did my first and only Ring of Honor pay-per-view Final Battle 2009 with Larry, and I always got along with Larry whenever I saw him. I mean, I never really got into great, deep conversation with him, but he was always very friendly to me in the little bits that we would talk, and he was cool to me. And if you just met him in those instances, you wouldn't really guess that he had all these other things going on, but he ended up hanging himself at a wrestling school of all places in Louisiana or maybe Texas. But either way, a rather sad ending, 29 years old. And of all the bad cases that go on in wrestling where I guess you could say it's the test where, let's say you just die and fall face first into a pizza, because that test isn't the only one who did that. Luna Vachon did it too. So it's just sad that someone chose to off themselves in that way, and I guess I'll let you talk about it, Corey, and I'll chime in afterwards, but I'm sure you've got stuff to add to that.
Well, as far as I know, the main drug problem, in quotation marks, that he had was that he wasn't on the drug that he needed. He was on a different medication for his bipolar disorder, and due to his financial situation, he couldn't afford the medication anymore, and he thought he was fine. This is the problem with some people who have bipolar. The medicine that most doctors give you, it really does just make it worse. The main problem he had with most of his medications, he didn't have any highs, he didn't have any lows. Let me explain it like this, since I have a few friends who are bipolar. When you are on most bipolar medications, things happen to you. You understand, I see a dead cat in the road, I should be sad. Something happy happened to me, I should be happy. But you don't have those emotions. You don't have happy or sad. You're just there. You exist. And that's a hell I wouldn't wish on anybody. With Larry, he had a lot of financial problems. As Chris Hero mentioned, it's really tragic. Larry was a gift to wrestling. Larry was an immaculate heel. I mean, this guy could get you to legitimately hate him. He would make you feel like whatever he was doing in the ring was as real as anything. It's a real tragedy that this man is now gone and that nobody was able to get to him in time. I had last seen Larry at an AAW show back in September, and for most of the night he was his usual jovial, happy-go-lucky self. It wasn't until right before we all were starting to leave that I saw any change in him, but I understood he was going through a bipolar episode, and that's what happens. He was such a light and such a joy, and when I heard the news that he was gone, I couldn't understand how to handle a situation like that. I was just shaking for 3 hours, just shaking, because I couldn't quite process Larry Sweeney not being around. This was a guy that went from being everywhere on the Midwest indie circuit to just gone. And it just did not sit with me for the longest time. And I hope that people don't trash his memory and write him off as, oh, just another druggy wrestler, just another Stain, another Randy the Ram, if you will. I hope people will research this wrestler, look him up on YouTube, and realize what a light he was and how much he meant to wrestling. I hope that people will not just write him off ignorantly like that.
I don't want to say I disagree, but I also can say that I wasn't surprised. I also want to point out, I've seen people leaving comments on different places and saying things like, well, why didn't they do this and why didn't anybody help them, blah, blah, blah. Well, if anybody has that impression, it's totally wrong. tons of his friends tried helping him. Many people tried reaching out to him and tried doing something and tried intervening. So I want to connect it to something else that's happened in wrestling recently, and that was the incident with Scott Hall at the Top Rope Promotions 30th anniversary show, because that video was, I had so many thoughts about it. I mean, there were a couple of videos that came out, but the one that I'm thinking of initially, where he's coming through the curtain, it was frightening. It literally looked like someone on their deathbed, zonked out of their mind, just going through the motions. And the way I want to connect it from Larry Sweeney to Scott Hall is, if you read the column on our website, the email, you saw some of the exchanges we had about it, and I said Scott Hall is going to die. And unfortunately, I think it's just the way it's going to be, because I believe in self-responsibility and helping yourself just as much as anything else. That being said, of course, I also believe in friendship and helping out people and things like that. But you know what? It only goes so far. The people need, of course, help and motivation and support, and that's great. But they also have to want to help themselves at some point. And that's why some of the people trying to reach out to Larry Sweeney and get him some help didn't get through, because it only goes so far. And then, like what Scott Hall's ex-wife was posting, that you just give up, because I made the joke about Scott Hall in the other show. Like, this guy's been in and out of rehab for like 13 years, 14 years. In fact, I remember watching the Monday Night Wars as they were unfolding on Raw and Nitro. At the beginning of every year for a couple months, Scott Hall would disappear, rehab every year. And that's not to say anything about WWE-financed rehab, pacemaker, whatever else is going on. And now Kevin Nash is talking about how he's saving his voicemails because he's expecting any one of them to be the last. That video was, I had so many thoughts about it. Frightening. And I know you kind of took it the wrong way when I said one of them was funny, Will Vafides, but I just mean in the sense that I've always made the case that wrestling is its own worst enemy, and it's the cause of its own problems. And one of them, it just looked like everything that's bad about wrestling summed up right there. This guy with obvious chemical problems or mental problems or all the above going out and doing this, obsessed with wrestling, as his ex-wife says, and the promoters that facilitate this and let this dumb shit happen. So that was my point about the whole thing. You can only help people to a certain point. At some point, they become lost causes. So what are your thoughts on the whole Scott Hall thing, Will Vafides?
Well, before I do that, I got to have a shout-out to my girl, Tara. Her birthday, she just turned 32, so happy birthday to her. We had a person pass away, a person who's now paralyzed and can't wrestle anymore, and we see a guy going out to the ring drugged up and can't perform. It was like one of the worst weeks in wrestling we've had in a long time, because it just shows you all the negatives in wrestling. You can't wrestle anymore because you have a bad neck, and the next time you go out there could be your last, or when you have a guy who is taking a lot of drugs and has tried to get the help he needs, and he can't get the help, and for some reason goes out there and, again, not being responsible. He's not responsible, and the promotion wasn't responsible. It goes back to Nash, who now has to try to help him out, because that's his best friend. That's just it. He's going to be there for him. And Nash, could do what he can. But again, seeing that video, like I said, it wasn't a funny thing because it's a scary thing. And I don't want to see someone who I grew up with watching pass away like that, because I would be truly upset.
But it's not an isolated incident either.
No, it's not, and that's the work of wrestling. And I know it's been controlled a lot more than it has been in the past, which is Vince McMahon offering rehab to all these people. Again, it's self-responsibility to go there, take it, and pass it, and continue down that road. Scott Hall didn't go to WrestleMania because he was afraid of all the demons that were around them. And then here we are a week later, he's out drinking anyway. So what's the difference? At least he would have been around people that would have stopped him. I really hope he can try to fix himself. He has.
Come on, Will. How long have we been saying that? How many times? You could count on two hands, and you have to go into other hands probably with how many times there's been an intervention or he's gone into rehab. It's just not, I don't think at this point going to happen. Now, does that mean you should give up? I don't know, but it just looks inevitable.
I think the safest thing to do is just make sure if it has to be Nash to take care of him for now, maybe Nash can figure out something to do if he can. Hopefully we don't have to hear a story or see something like that again with any wrestler.
I was going to talk about Jeff Hardy because his name came up to someone I was having a conversation with this week, and how many times have we mentioned that he left WWE? WWE did not renew his contract because of his drug problems that everybody knows about, and incidentally, supposedly Matt's even more fucked up than him. And then a couple of weeks after his contract expires, he gets busted for drugs. That case is still being delayed seemingly every week. But Jeff Hardy seems like another one of these guys. He knows he's doing drugs. He likes doing drugs, doesn't give a fuck, and is going to keep doing them anyway. I always knew that live for the moment was really code for do as much drugs as you want. But let's keep in mind, we point out that, in fact, there's been a lot of talk on our message board about TNA and their treatment as far as wrestlers' health goes, but I always make it a point to say that TNA would hire, and they did, Jeff Hardy, regardless of his drug issue. Yeah, but you know what? It's the second time they did that. He left WWE years ago, and they took him in. So it's not even the first time they did that. Any thoughts on what I like to call these lost causes, Will Brooks, that just seem bent on their own self-destruction?
Well, it's not wrong. You can't really do much more than you've already done. I mean, guy's been to rehab how many damn times? Not like he hasn't had the opportunity to get clean himself. This has also been an ongoing problem since, the mid-'90s? You really can't do anything more for that guy than you already have. Jeff Hardy, if he doesn't want to get clean, then so be it. That's his problem, you know? Don't encourage it by keep giving him wrestling contracts when he's not going to fulfill them.
Will Vafidez mentioned Edge retiring, and that was pretty unexpected. I guess not if you're Edge, who's been doing a good job of keeping his numbness and spinal problems hidden, but all that caught up to him. It's amazing that this guy ends up retiring before The Undertaker. Edge gave up the title the other week on SmackDown. That was recapped by Zach Fellows on our website. And any thoughts on Edge's retirement, getting out while the getting's good and he can still walk? And Hogan called him a pussy for it, Will.
Smart move, not only by Edge but by WWE to make sure that what his condition really was about. Obviously, WrestleMania made more sense now why Edge won. Well, that made it pretty clear. Why he was a Christian,
Well, he got the MRI the day after, so I don't know if that
I think they already knew that this was coming. I'm sure that they must have known this was coming, and God bless him for, getting out while he can. You could still have a great prominent role in WWE as far as marketing or even doing just some PR work, just going out there representing the brand. His new T-shirt, really, really cool T-shirt. If anybody has not seen his new T-shirt, it's a pretty cool T-shirt. I would recommend getting it. What a great career he's had. You look back on it, he's had an amazing career, and it wasn't until 2004 or 2005 when he was able to basically say what he wants after the Matt Hardy angle, where he really hit his stride. This is the kind of guy who broke away from a tag team and became a huge star. And it's very hard to do that, especially, Shawn Michaels did it. Edge is another one that can do it. It was a great career for him, and I'm just glad he got out while he can. But again, enough's enough sometimes. When you're working 300 days a year, what do you expect?
I haven't been the biggest Edge fan, as everyone who's watched the show before knows, but I'm certainly not going to take away from the genuine emotion of that moment. That was very nice. And I think we're going to do a career retrospective on Edge on our next videotaping, but more on that another time. Edge's retirement necessitated the draft being moved up earlier this year, although seemingly everyone's on every show anyway, I think. That's the impression I get every week, so what difference does it really make? But this year, to SmackDown, Randy Orton, Mark Henry, Sin Cara, Daniel Bryan, the Usos, and Tamina, Regal, Yoshitatsu, Natalya, etc. To Raw, Jack Swagger, Rey Mysterio, Big Show, Alberto Del Rio. Cena got traded back and forth for no real reason, but your thoughts on the draft, Will Brooks?
Before I answer that, I just have a thing about Edge. If he was going to retire less than a month after, why did he just lose to Alberto Del Rio at WrestleMania and call it a career then? I don't get it. Would have been better off that way. Anyway,
I think so too, but we're running out of time, so your thoughts on the draft?
I think the Cena thing was really fucking stupid. I didn't get it at all.
It really takes away from any sort of real sports element they could have possibly had, because in a draft, you go to choose people you want. Making it a lottery is just silly, and I don't know, did you think it was a waste to do this swerve, or does it make it seem more real?
Yeah, but like I just don't understand like what's Raw gonna do now? Like are they gonna? I mean, I would thought they would try to push younger guys, but most of the younger guys they just kind of threw on SmackDown. So I don't really know.
Well, I guess they feel they needed to stack SmackDown, but we've stacked this show and we're running out of time. So join us on WrestlingRoundtable.com. Sign up for the newsletter. More expanded talk going on there. And join us next time on Blog Talk Radio. And look for some of the latest shows. Our biggest shows ever are on YouTube now. The Invasion Show, show number 50 with our biggest panel and our longest length. You can also find our last Blog Talk Radio show, Wrestling Roundtable Radio, which covered WrestleMania weekend. That was also pretty huge. But next time, we're going to talk about the hugest show in UFC history, UFC 129, along with WWE Extreme Rules. So for the panel of Will Vafides, Will Brooks, Rodney LeConte, Coriander Ake, I'm Erich Santamaria, WrestlingRoundtable.com.